I mean, we've scaled our program to be able to support growers of all sizes. We've done that with a strategic vision to ensuring that no farm is sort of left out of market access if they need it or if they're asked. You know, things are in flux when it comes to market access. There are different requests that are happening, particularly for certain categories, along with the fact that, you know, under the produce safety rule, depending on how it's been adopted and implemented within each jurisdiction, those exemptions for either your buying patterns or the amount of revenue you make seem like they're pretty clear, but at times they're not. Nor does it prevent a buyer from asking for an audit or some sort of paperwork for the non-covered crops under the produce safety rules. So in Massachusetts, we've tried to combine all that. We have an advantage through that combination, or that the way we've designed our service delivery, both for the program, which means we can be a little bit more efficient, but for the farm space, you know, we want farms that are smaller to be able to build in these systems of food safety as they start off. So as they expand or grow, that's a part of their DNA of the farm culture. So we're very focused on that. We hope we've been invited even to some houses who they're starting a microgreen farm in their bedroom. And we try to give them the resources that they need and sort of the advice so that they're operating properly. And like I said, any market barriers that are popping up, we're able to help them navigate that and move their product. So we have a little presentation. I'm joined by Eric Stenfors, who's one of our senior folks, and I don't mean just in age or wisdom at the department, but operationally. So Eric does conduct a lot of the inspections. You'll hear me as I talk later that the posture of the regulatory side of what we do has always been an educate before and while we regulate approach. We were doing that well before FDA coined that phrase. We got lucky that it lined up with how we had set things up already. But we do work with growers to try to give them the tools and information they need to feel confident in what they're doing. So we do provide technical support. What does that mean? Inspectors can go out and do a pre-inspection or a pre-audit and sort of really reduce the anxieties of not knowing, or what's the inspector going to say when they see this on my farm? How are they going to react? So I think with that intro, Leah or Sarah, if you want to include it, do you want to include anything at this juncture before we launch the presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for those of you who are here who are on our incubator farm, this is something that we get certified, but our goal this year is to get everyone individually in some capacity certified. So look out for those updates, and we'll have a meeting about that. But we are going to be having, so there's CQP, the presentation, I'm sure we'll cover this, but CQP also encompasses the Federal Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule. And with that, there's a training which through the Produce Safety Alliance, which is a PSA training, and we'll be offering one of those on May 17th. Free of charge to new entry folks or affiliates. So look out for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get the certification, that follows you for life, even if you move to a different farm or end up starting something different in the future, at least for fresh produce. So yeah, thank you for that. So style of the presentation is I'm going to talk very casually through it. I'd like to keep it informal. I definitely want questions or comments as we navigate the slides. You don't have to wait until the end. And I have absolutely no problem if you're cooking, eating, taking even if you take a nap, just turn your camera off so I don't see that. but we'll try to keep it interactive and have everybody engaged. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to share my screen here. Let's see how this goes. And let me make sure I find the right window here. Okay, can everybody see my cluttered desktop? I hope you can. And we're going to go ahead and launch this presentation if I can get that going. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. All right, so let's go ahead and start. We're going to talk about the services that we provide, how that's going to fit into this group in terms of what was just mentioned in terms of the PSA training, and then the walkthrough that we're going to do on your farm. So here's our mission statement. You know, our job is to obviously support and regulate safe production and marketing of fresh produce in the Commonwealth, but we do like to think that at the same time, we want to provide you know, those market access options, or expand those market access options for our farms in Massachusetts. We are a public health centric program, so that is what we focus on, right? Reducing public health impacts through the consumption of fresh produce. Once again, that's within the jurisdiction of Massachusetts, but Terry, as you asked before, that is consistent with other New England states. So out of the New England region, all the states have their own statutory authority, which means they operate under their own law, with the exception of Maine, who operates under FDA authority. So that means when a Maine Department of Agriculture inspector shows at a farm, they are acting as a federal inspector. They carry federal credentials with them, and they conduct that under FDA authority. So they report back to FDA. Any enforcement and compliance action that happens, that occurs under FDA authority. With the other states I mentioned, that would happen within the jurisdiction. So, and every state has slight variations on those components, whether it's the way inspections are conducted, the paperwork that they use, the way they conduct enforcement and compliance. So any questions that you have along those lines, I will be able to answer specifically for Massachusetts, but I know the other programs and the other program directors in the region pretty well. So I might be able to answer any questions if you're coming from another state or have a question specific to a different jurisdiction. So in the program area, we currently support these 4 service areas. They are distinct, but as I said, they do overlap. That is a strategic decision that we made to overlap those services, so they're seamless for the person or the farm receiving these services, okay? But they are distinct. We do keep them separated, and I'm going to go through these areas. And once again, any questions or comments or anything that you would like me to clarify as we talk, I will do that. So we're going to start with our produce safety inspection program, and that's the regulatory side of the house. Massachusetts, as I said, we adopted the law by reference. That law falls under the Food Safety Modernization Act. That's, I think you've all heard it as the Produce Safety Rule, or CFR 21 Part 112. Farms in Massachusetts that are mixed type facilities. And what does that mean? Those are farms that are not only growing, harvesting, storing, racks, what we call raw agricultural commodities, but they're also processing crops. So let's take winter squash. A lot of farms have moved into value-added processing for winter squash, particularly butternut, whether that's halving or cubing or noodling. So those farms that conduct those 2 activities in the same building, they'd be covered by another part of FSMA. That's Part 117, or what we call preventive controls for human food. So we are working with our regulatory partners, both at the federal and state level, to make sure, once again, that's seamless and we're not creating any undue anxiety or conflict. And why would that occur possibly? Farms that are using one building to conduct all those activities are usually using the same infrastructure for both sides of that activity. So your processed product goes in the same cooler as your raw agricultural commodities. So what we want to try to avoid, or what we're attempting to avoid, is one inspection program, possibly identifying a corrective action for your cooler, for instance, and then a second regulatory entity going in and telling you that's not the case, or filing a corrective action that may conflict with the previous occurrence. So we're still working through that. We haven't had any real issues with that yet, but we are sort of omniscient in paying attention to that. So in Massachusetts, I told you that we had modified our statute that's different from other states. And part of that is those inbound requests. And you see that in the fourth bullet. So if you're a farm and you want an inspection, and I know many of you might be saying, why the hell would someone just want an inspection? But once again, we're anticipating buyers may be asking for this, and we're prepared to do that under our statute. We will provide that support. You will be put on our inspectional rolls, and you'll stay there until you request to be taken off. You'll receive the same exact service, independent of your scale or your coverage or what you grow. Once again, based on that market access. So that is very unique to Massachusetts and Vermont and Rhode Island, because once again, talking about the New England states, we've all adopted that approach, and it's really been focused on helping our small farms grow the right way and have them be able to access markets whenever they are able. So the regulatory program, it's super structured. I mean, we work closely with FDA. We're funded, many of our activities are funded under a cooperative agreement with the federal agency. And through that cooperative agreement, they really are doing, I feel, a pretty good job in trying to maintain some consistency across state programs, uniformity and consistency, the way we operate. So I also serve on the Program Standards Committee for Produce. So if any of you know anything about regulatory programs in food safety, Manufactured Foods has MIFRIPS, that's the Manufactured Food and Retail Program Standards. AFRIPS, Animal Feed has one, Eggs does. We are now developing those standards for produce. That'll provide a framework to make sure that every produce program, currently there are 47 separate programs. Those are state, federal, and tribal entities. And those program standards will help us align the components of a program to make sure that farms, independent of where they're operating or if they span jurisdictions, they know what to expect and it's consistent. Part of our law, which is Mass General Law, Chapter 128, Section 124, that adopts the federal rule once again, but modifies it slightly when it comes to non-covered crops and non-covered activities or farms. We also have developed and recently promulgated our Produce Safety and Market Access Regulations, 330 CMR 34, and that just basically gives the parameters of how we operate. So Leah, I will, when we do our walkthrough, I'll bring copies of this. It's great to put you to sleep, but it sort of gives you the details of what we're doing on the regulatory side. So broadly, it's the CFR, pretty much spelled out, but there are, once again, nuances in the way we conduct inspections, definitely the way we conduct enforcement and compliance. We do have broad public health authority that resides under the commissioner. We are able to stop sale, embargo products, send produce for destruction if need be. And those are broad authorities that most public health entities have access to. I don't feel we'll ever need to use it. I'm hopeful that we'll never need to use it, but they're there to prevent, obviously, an adverse public health situation. So that's the foundation of our program. Our enforcement and compliance scheme is escalatory. And what does that mean? It's mainly based on working with you. That's how we've structured it. We don't have fines in Massachusetts. We don't have citations. When an inspection does take place, if there's something we would like you to fix or pay attention to, we are able to annotate what we call corrective actions. Those corrective actions usually have a prescribed time frame of correction. Many times it's the situation that we would like to see some focus on the next inspectional cycle, which is a year out. If it's a little bit more, a situation that we think you should pay attention to, we'll give a 30-day or a 60-day, but we'll also provide, like I said, the resources to help you get to where you need to go. So we're not leaving anyone isolated in terms of, we write something down, you don't understand it. That's the way we're postured. We do have a farm registration in Massachusetts. We are currently moving this to a mandatory registration. So there is a big difference in the region when it comes to registrations. When the federal rule was put in place, there was no registration included in CFR 21 Part 112. So many of the programs under the initial CAP funding sort of approached the space in a voluntary registration posture, meaning we were asking farms to self-identify, or we were driving around finding farms, looking at data that the federal government had provided us, as well as private entities, to try to build up that initial database of what we call farm registry. We are moving to a more structured approach that's similar to Rhode Island and Connecticut, where it will be an annual mandatory registration for farms who grow produce in Massachusetts. That is our plan to move forward. So we don't have a fee included with that registration. We don't have any intent to include a fee, but the data quality is really hard to maintain in a voluntary structure. And for the farmers on the call, you know exactly why. I mean, you're changing crop plans, acreage is changing, you're dropping leased acreage, you're gaining others, different locations, you're marketing and selling different each year. Your buyers there's flux in your buyers who you're working with. So that's our approach moving forward. We hope to have that launched this year, probably as the season starts already. So any questions on any of this before I move to the next slide, or any comments? Perfect. So our second part, and I might have the slides. The slides might be slightly out of order here. Let me see what I have next. No, I guess we're on Commonwealth quality. Oh, Eric, I'm going to throw you here. I'm going to start. But Eric, if you can talk about how we've aligned these two, because I know you worked on that document. So CQP is a third-party audit program. It's basically GAPS. We call it Massachusetts GAPS. That's the foundation. And we started this in 2008. God, it was a long time ago. And we did that to help our farms in Massachusetts prepare for what we assumed at the time would be more intensive audit programs, such as USDA GAPS or Primus or some of the other third parties that were out there. What ended up happening is we had a wonderful success with farms really taking advantage of the service. And currently we have over 110 farms, and every year we have more who sign up. It's really set up in a way that's easy for folks to understand. I mean, the audit programs are checklist based. We provide on-farm education and training. We do workshops, sort of like this sort of thing. And we really sort of, hold hands with the farm to make sure they're implementing things in a way that's sustainable for their operation. What we've seen with a lot of these programs is farms sort of have a check the box mentality, like what do I need to do to just get by this portion of the audit? And we always approached it in a way that we were hoping that once again, that was going to turn into some sort of cultural impact on the farm, where the farm and the farm staff, just as important, if not more important, were really buying into what this meant in terms of their production, their consumers, the people they sell their produce to. And it was important for farm economic viability moving forward. So there's a pretty detailed program structure. We do have environmental practices that are included, including like IPM. It's not points or no points, but we do talk to you about, lessening your impacts on the environment. It's verified. We do source verification, so we're not going to audit anything that you don't grow. That was another issue we were having with some of the audit programs. Farms were being audited for product that they were buying in and not growing. So it was hard to verify some of the practices that were occurring. And what we've done, I mean, it includes a food safety plan, just like all the other programs, but I like to think of it as a food safety plan light. We're trying to avoid any farm giving us a binder that has 425 pages, but they can't explain much of what's in it. This is another thing that we were seeing in the space where farms were downloading templates and thinking that's what they needed to do and never really integrating some of the practices that they were identifying in records or logs, once again, as part of the cultural practices on farm. As I mentioned before, and Eric, you can sort of take it from here, we do also have in our statute and our regs that successful audits conducted under the CQP for produce program can be deemed compliant with Massachusetts MGL Chapter 128, Section 124, and our regs. And what does that mean? And why is it different from other audit programs? Since we have developed and deployed the audit program under the department's existing authority for marketing programs for agricultural products, meaning we are the authority for those sort of programs, we are also, though, the authority for the statute, or CFR 21 Part 112, as adopted in Massachusetts. That gives us the ability to make these things compliant, not aligned with. You'll hear other audit programs say it's aligned with the produce safety rule. Since we're the regulatory authority, we're able to provide, once again, compliance with that. So we have a wonderful document that Eric and one of our colleagues, Steve, who's not present, worked on, and that's compliance criteria. So what it does is it takes our audit requirements, and beside each audit requirement, it actually lists the compliance components that are listed in the produce safety rule. So by doing something on an audit, you know, you're covering 2 or 3 items, in some cases more, in some cases less, that are included in the produce safety rule. So Leah, I know you had mentioned that about CQP, and that's where we're definitely different. And we're able to do that if need be. Okay. Operationally, yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Oh, I just had a quick question. When you were talking to Terry earlier, you mentioned USDA gaps just offhand, and I didn't know if this was the same. Could it be the same? No, you would need a separate inspector to come.
Yeah, so let's be clear. It is the same in terms of market access for every retailer in Massachusetts who buys produce. So let me be clear about that. So
okay,
when
so
a retailer,
it satisfies the request for USDA gap by retailers in Massachusetts.
Correct, and they are aware of CQP, and if they're not, we will get on the phone and talk with them. We negotiated, I'll give you an example, we negotiated with Whole Foods for, I don't know, Eric, a year and a half?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, particularly for the leafy green category to make sure it was accepted in Massachusetts. So what does happen on occasion is a buyer will say gaps. The farm will go, oh my God, that has to be USDA gaps. And they'll take that route without knowing that the CQP program provides the same market access for that channel, if that's what they're engaging in.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm proud of that. I mean, we did a lot of work with that and a lot of
that's awesome.
interaction with buyers. And I mean, we've had even farms from other states actually use it. We had a buyer in Texas who was buying product out of Massachusetts and, you know, worked with them and they accepted it. And I think I mentioned when Terry was asking questions, shockingly, even the USDA accepted it as an equivalent for USDA gaps for their food box program during the pandemic, which made me extremely proud of all the hard work we put into it. As a community, it wasn't just the department, it was growers, the extension, other educators, both in the state and in the region. So I feel we've got a pretty good product and we keep it chugging along. So does that make sense, Leah?
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions?
I just say, add to a little bit here. So
Please do.
CQP is for market access, but the bones is about food safety. And I don't know if we'll talk about it later, but there's communication between us and the farmer or the farms involved. So it's not, hey, this is what has to happen. You know, like Mike said about your food safety plan, it's unique to you and your farm. So if it's three pages and you're doing it correctly, then that's great. And then we can build on that. But it's the relationships between us and you guys and building that trust that we're not going to come in and, you know, just throw the weight around. It is a working relationship on how things get done. And that's how you build that food safety culture. Just as you grow your farm, it's embedded at the beginning. And that's what kind of this whole program's about as well. Not just market access, but that food safety culture as well. So
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for that. In fact, interestingly enough, or once another thing I'm proud of, 70% of the folks in the program actually found out about the program through another farmer. It wasn't through the state website, or it was actually farm to farm. And we still get a lot of referrals where a farmer will say, I was talking to my buddy who's a farmer who's worked with you in the past, and I have some questions and concerns, and they said I could reach out to the program. And Eric's extremely right. I mean, it establishes that relationship, and then we build upon that relationship to once again reduce anxiety. So it's not just about market access. Thank you.
I mean, we have farms that don't need the market access support, but they're still in the CQP
They're still
program,
in the program, right?
you know, because of that. So
Right. Yep. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on. Eric, we'll just go back and forth. I'll start and then you can throw stuff in, okay? So
good.
as I said, it's checklist based like most, like most audit programs. It does include some other either regulations that we have in state or practices that we would like to promote. And when I say we, that's not just the department, that's also commodity groups that were part of this development. Once again, UMass Extension, along with other partners, both in the state and in the region. It includes pesticide and WPS regulations. I mean, those are part of most audit programs. Soil and water conservation practices, we've adopted some of those that are NRCS based or AEEP based. That's our Massachusetts Agricultural Environment Enhancement Program. And then compost, particularly animal-based compost, is part of that checklist, as it is all audit programs. So you'll see that the date there, I May 2019, we actually just updated the requirements. We do it annually. There's an annual review. We take a look at that. We make modifications. We make improvements. Things are also changing. Science is changing. So science's input on practices that were traditional or were implemented earlier are not necessarily being maintained because of new science and new changes. So those updates account for those as well. I talked about the compliance criteria alignment document. Once again, we'll provide that to everybody so you can see it. And we have templates just like everybody else. We try not to use the templates too much, but if somebody asks for an example, we do send it out. As Eric mentioned, our MO when it comes to that is we'd rather a farm have only 3 procedures if they're maintaining it instead of having 10 and they only do 2. And that also reduces a lot of anxiety where farms can sort of walk the path with us a little, learn how to develop an SOP if they need to, understand how to use that to their operations advantage first, and then think of compliance with requirements or with law sort of secondly or at the same time. It just builds that relationship and helps establish that food safety culture.
Yeah.
Eric, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so that just, if you've never seen the checklist, which you may have not, it's based on certain sections, agricultural water, health and hygiene, training section, there's equipment, tools and buildings. So it's all broken down. And like Mike said, for every question we have an answer in that compliance criteria. So exactly what are we looking for, and it spells it out. So it's pretty straightforward. kind of a document, but just so if you've never seen it, to get kind of imagine what it looks like.
And as I said, CQP farms that receive an audit, they can get their PSR compliant simultaneously. So that's the way we've developed that. So here's a little graphic of everyone that's accepting the standard currently, and there's a lot of other folks that we didn't fit in here because I just couldn't fit everybody on the slide, but it's some of the bigger ones. Every year there's a new challenge. There are a lot of these buyers now that are putting a extreme focus on leafy greens, and you may understand why. But some of these folks have even expanded that category to include kale, Swiss chard, things that have not been associated necessarily with recent outbreaks. So, just like we build relationships with farms, we have relationships with all these folks. Some are harder than others because their decision centers are not in the Northeast anymore. Stop and Shop, for instance, in Hannaford's, they're part of the same group now, but their QA systems are run out of the Netherlands. So we spend time on the phone with the Netherlands on occasion, particularly when it comes to reviewing audit paperwork or submitting documents that they request on behalf of services that we've provided. So, once again, we're pretty happy about working with all these folks. They all know what we do. Many of them have come out with us on audits to see what we do and how we do it. And there's just a lot of confidence in the community based on how we operate. So yes, I figured the slides were a little bit out of order here, so I apologize for that. So this is just going back to what we talked about before. Here's the federal standards. It's the first time that that produce has been regulated as set forth in, once again, that 21 CFR Part 112. So we have condensed versions of that. We have these little booklets. They literally fit in your pocket, and they're like, I don't know, 35, 40 pages. They're really easy, particularly for a grower to have access to. So we're in the process of ordering a bunch of those, and hopefully we'll have those for when we do the on-site portion of the plan that we put together, and we'll be able to give those out to everybody. So yes, and this is just getting into the specifics of the authority and the rule. So I'm not going to go through all of these slide by slide. We do issue an inspection certificate if needed. We were talking about that today. So, and once we move to formal registration, you will get a formal certificate of registration, just like any other food program. So we are working on that. Hopefully that'll be implemented next year. Then here is our regulations that I mentioned, 330 CMR 34, which establishes that statewide science-based minimum standards. Once again, many of the components are just copied verbatim from the federal register into our regs. The difference is basically in the service approach, how we conduct inspections, how we communicate with farmers on those inspections, what our authority is, more specific, particularly for those that are not necessarily pathogenic in nature or microbial in nature, as is the most focused intent of the rule, as well as the enforcement and compliance piece. We talked about the registry, the registration, and how we're doing that. Once again, our plan is to have paper and online channels. I mean, I'd love to be able to move to just an online channel eventually, 100%, but we do have a challenge interacting with farms using electronic formats in many cases. We are developing a system that allows us to do inspections using tablets or laptops. We're doing this also to create efficiencies within the way we operate, be able to get paperwork out to farms quickly. We have had some situations in the past where we'll reach out to a farm saying you had voiced your interest in receiving an audit, and they'll say, no, we're all set. And then Eric, what happens about a week later? They say, I need an audit tomorrow because I can't move.
Panic.
They're in a panic. And sometimes getting out there is part of the challenge, but getting all the paperwork together is the bigger challenge, particularly when somebody wants to move stuff that's going to go bad out of their shed in a day or two. So our plan is to automate the whole process so we can actually conduct an inspection and submit the paperwork electronically back to the farm immediately after the inspection takes place. So that's at least where the vision is. We'll see if we ever get there. But that's at least the intent. Talked about non-covered farms and non-covered produce, and this is very specific to Massachusetts. We do conduct outbound inspections for covered farms or farms that fall into inspectional categories that we've assigned. But once again, we can support non-covered farms and non-covered produce or non-covered activities. Is that confusing for anybody when you hear that? Or do you understand?
I don't understand what are covered farms and what are not covered farms.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked that question. I want everybody to talk about that. So the FDA has a list of covered produce, and what that means is these are raw agricultural commodities that they either have direct evidence of or feel that they could provoke foodborne illness, right? So let me give one that we all hear about often: romaine lettuce, right? I mean, there's been several outbreaks with romaine lettuce coming out of the West Coast, both California and Arizona, although them trying to find point of origin has been very difficult on tracebacks and investigations as to where the pathogens are actually coming from that provoke the illness. So that's what's under that covered produce list. Non-covered produce is normally things that would receive a kill step, meaning cooking, in the consumer's home. So for instance, winter squash, butternut squash, is non-covered. And I hope no one tries to eat that raw because it'd be tough on your teeth and gums, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's something that you probably got to cook. So any pathogenic load is going to be mitigated through the cooking process. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, and those lists are online. The lists are changing all the time because there's new threats that are emerging. We now have, we're hearing more and more outbreaks or illnesses associated with cyclospora, which is a parasite. And that's calling into question different categories of crops, berries, herbs, things that were sort of associated with other pathogens 10, 15 years ago. So these lists are sort of changing and modifying all the time. But that's what covered produce is, or non-covered produce. When it comes to covered farms or non-covered farms, that's based on revenue and then distribution of your produce in terms of marketing, right? So if you're above, and I don't know what it is currently adjusted for inflation, particularly with the inflation rate this year, but when the rule was, what'd you say, Eric? 28,000?
28,000 and change.
Yeah. So when the rule was first promulgated, it was based on farms were covered by the rule if you sold a minimum of $25,000 worth of produce, of covered produce. So once again, then there was another category, which was qualified exempt, and that was a whole other grouping depending on how you sold it. And once again, we're trying to provide support across the continuum of produce production in Massachusetts, and that's why we sort of included some flexibility in the rules so we could provide that sort of support. Did that answer your question clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So here's some of the standards that are in there, and these are just the generals. We're not going to go through. As Eric mentioned, these are pretty similar to what we have in our audit program for the most part, right? So personal qualifications and training. You're all going to learn about these when you take the PSA that Lisa McKeague's are going to give. So each one of these sections is a module in the Produce Safety Alliance curriculum. So you're going to learn about how all these may impact public health and the practices that you can deploy or implement on your farm that reduce these inputs in relation to illnesses associated with the consumption of fresh produce. Any other questions? Okay, we also support sprouts. We did adopt a separate subpart of the rule, subpart M, and we are going to start conducting that activity this year. We only have 3 registered sprout facilities in Massachusetts. Maybe there's more, but they haven't registered with FDA. For those entities, FDA will take the lead, and we will accompany on the inspection. If something was to occur that was related to enforcement and compliance or anything like that, that would fall under our jurisdiction, not FDA, but they will continue to at least take the lead on those inspections. Okay. I'm not going to go through this whole slide. This pretty much says that we have the right to enter if we want to. You know, we have a very soft posture, Eric, right? When we're interacting with farms, we kind of call, we say hello. Many of the farms that we inspect, we've known for years, decades in some cases, so they know us by name. We try to talk to them about when they have availability. You know, we try to do inspections when you have more crops in the field. Leah, you were asking when our inspectional activity picks up. You know, we get out for some of the early crops like strawberries if we need to for market access earlier. But, you know, end of June, early July, starting in that period is when you have more crops that are, you know, coming to harvest. So we try to focus more of our activity there, because if not, then we're sort of jumping around and we're not really taking, you know, we're not realizing the benefits of that service model when it comes to efficiency. It's not uncommon for a farm to say, hey, I need an audit for my strawberries. Can you come out in early June? And then we get, you know, then they'll say, now we need a certificate for our butternut in October. So we do our best to try to make that work to the best of our ability. For the bigger farms who are growing for diversity of crops, sometimes that's a challenge, but I don't think we've let any slip. Have we, Eric?
No, I don't think so.
No, so I think we've been good. So any questions on any of this stuff? So your farms generally, collectively, would not be covered, right, Leah? The farmers themselves. The cooperative combined, though, you're probably covered, right? Depending on how you're registered legally. No, just trying to unmute. You're still muted.
Yeah, sorry.
There you
I
go.
had the second screen and I always get confused where
okay.
the pointer is. Yeah, so that's where we have always had challenges in the past, as I'm sure Eric knows what new entry is as an entity.
Yeah.
Different, but it's also a food hub and we're buying from people, alumni of the program and stuff. So yeah, part of it's about just general farm education in Massachusetts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I you know, that example that you just gave about how you're operating and how, I mean, let's be blunt, how confusing it can be, right? Trying to fit it under the statute or under an audit program. A lot of farms have this difficulty understanding, even the qualified exempt folks, because they're qualified exempt some years, but then other years they're not. It's an average of 3 years, the way the rule is written. I mean, there's a lot of loopholes for farms to sort of get out of it, but then farms go, I just want to tell me what I need to do. And I want to, you know, do it the right way and make it easy. So, I mean, that's kind of why we've taken this approach and, you know, easy peasy, you know, we're doing what we need to do to support the farm and, you know, hopefully doing the right thing for public health at the same time. I mean, that's always been sort of the approach, because it does get it gets confusing. Absolutely. Especially as farms diversify and sell different things and do different things. So we do have in 3406 adulterated or misbranded produce. So we don't want to get anyone too worked up about this. But, you know, the rule does indicate that farms, the rule that farms have to, at a prominent location, at a point of sale, particularly for qualified exempt farms, that they do need to identify where the produce was grown. You know, this is a challenge across the space. This is no different than the seafood industry years ago. And they're still working through species identification and stuff like that, issues with that in the public health space. So we're not planning on doing much in this area for some time. We are going to start sort of educating folks, particularly farms that operate at farmers markets or have farm stands. You know, because Leah, as you mentioned, I mean, it's very normal. It's not abnormal for farms to buy product in from other farms, and we encourage that, obviously. But, you know, you should be communicating with your consumers that, you know, if you're selling peaches from Massachusetts in March, you'd like to think that consumers would understand that we don't have peaches in March, but that's not always the case. And with some of our other programs, we don't do that, but other programs do compliance buys secretly on products like that, particularly if they're being purchased under programs that offer federal assistance. And, you know, more and more, I don't think it's a nefarious exercise on behalf of the farm. It's just they've never done it in the past. I'm not sure if they need to, right? So, I mean, part of that is just a lot of education and outreach, and we do plan on doing that moving forward. Talked about compliance enforcement. How are we doing on time? Pretty good, I guess. We can go to a 5 pass. So I'll go through these quick. We talked about this compliance enforcement. It's just escalatory. 90% of the enforcement and compliance activity will hopefully happen with the inspector, right, Eric?
Yep.
That's going to be you. So that sounds scary. It's really not. It's as simple as writing down an observation, making sure that turns into a corrective action if that's the prescription, and then working with the farm to achieve it. It's really that simple. So let me give you an example. Mouse droppings in a pack shed. Not a lot, right? Not a big mouse infestation, just the inspector, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, you could annotate that, but the correction could be as simple as the seal on the garage door that is missing. All you got to do is replace that seal, right?
Yep.
And Eric, you may say you'll be back in 30 days, or you may say you'll be back in 60, or it can wait until the next inspectional cycle, correct?
Yep. Or they fix it at that moment too, and then
Yep.
it won't get written down or something. But yeah.
Yep. So that's how we conduct it in Massachusetts. That's the MO. And once again, if you're looking for technical resources or any recommendation of who you may reach out to find that equipment, or, you know, we have a pretty big Rolodex of folks that we can put farms in contact with. So lastly, and we're sort of, I don't want to go through all these slides, so I'll get the question. Lastly, we do the education and outreach. And that is funded under the department, both through FDA funding and through state funding. And this is a little bit different for a regulatory program, right? I mean, normally public health programs don't do this sort of thing, particularly while they're out, right? They go out, they do an inspection, they sort of write down what they see, and then you got to figure out what the inspector meant and what you need to do to fix it or comply. You know, we've done this in a format where we're working with you the whole time, and FDA's really bought into that, mainly because the whole statute is focused on prevention. And the only way you can prevent something from happening is empowering folks to know what they should do or what they can do to minimize or mitigate that risk. So we're completely in that posture. If any of you have any concerns or questions, oh my God, what does this mean for me? I don't need to do this. Why is it important? I mean, we're here to answer all those things and definitely reduce anxiety. I mean, we have a long list of farms that we've worked with over the decade that I think all feel really good about the interactions they've had with us and sort of how we've helped them. So with that, I want to open it up to all of you. I'd love, it would have been nice to do introductions, but I think I'll see all of you, right, at the PSA training or at the walkthrough. Is that correct? Leah, Sarah, is that true?
No, not everyone, but
No, okay, all right. So Terry, how are you on this call? Now I got a question for you.
So I was a new entry. I was on the incubator farm. I'm an
Oh,
alumni,
wow, awesome, cool.
and I still sell to the food hub.
Gotcha.
But I have since moved to New Hampshire.
Gotcha.
And yes, I have a customer who requires CAP certification. So
Right.
I do have that. And I'm happy to hear that there's some overlap there. And I would hope that that would be sufficient, for the food hub, which I think it is. And
Oh, yeah.
and now I have another customer asking for GAP. And so yeah, it just seems, and Massachusetts seems to have obviously solved this problem, or at least is working to address it. So that's great. They're always ahead of the curve. But
Well, let's not be that arrogant. Yeah.
But I'm just trying to simplify things on my end, and
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Christina Sweet runs CAPS along with Hans Estrin up there at UVM, right?
Yeah.
And I know them. So we talk often, and every time I promote CQP to a buyer, I'll always include Vermont CAPS, Rhode Island GAPS, and Connecticut GAPS, because though we have all dropped our cooperative agreements with USDA, we don't work with USDA anymore on the provision of GAP audits. We don't do it. So it's important that we're sort of in lockstep. We interact with the buyers. We've tried to provide some assurance on consistency. So, but Terry, just the size of your farm, just scale in terms of acreage.
Yeah, I'm like an acre right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a prime example of why we structured things this way, because, everybody was saying, I mean, even the Fed was saying, oh no, the small farms aren't going to need inspections. And I could tell you, Eric, you're on the call, so you could provide the support to this. I mean, we were on a call with a relatively big buyer in the Northeast who said they're going to want to start seeing inspection reports.
Right.
And they buy from farms that aren't fully covered under the rule.
Mm-hmm.
So, we want to be able to provide that support in Massachusetts. So.
And just for some background for, if there's any other new entry incubator farmers on the call, I'm headed in a wholesale direction. Like that's my whole business. So these certifications are mandatory for most, if not all, of my customers. And if you're doing farmers markets in a CSA, maybe, you'll never need these, but I certainly think it's good practice, and it's good common sense, SOPs for your business is, it's always a good idea. But if you are thinking about pursuing or heading in a wholesale direction, like you might as well start now.
Yeah, and Terry, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I mean, as Eric mentioned, we have about 40 farms in CQP who don't wholesale. I mean, they just want to be able to reduce their liability and they want to do the right thing. They care about their customers. So independent of your structure, and once again, we size the program to be able to do that. So we got some hands raised, and Lindsay, just because I know you, I'm going to go to, are you done eating and what did you make? I want to know.
Well, I'm a personal chef, so I just made a week's worth of food today. I'm a little weary, but it's good to hear you guys talking while I was finishing up my day. I almost hate to ask this question, but we have to talk about water. So what kind of guidance do you give people for ag water, for how much water testing?
Lindsay, I'm sorry I called on you first. I should have called this class.
I know. Leah's, but she just did an 8-week course with us, and the last one was about water, and it's just we're just arguing.
I want the first of all, the water science is all over the place.
Yeah.
And as we know, I mean, there's a lot of practices inherent to the traditional audit programs that, to be honest with you, none of it's based on science at all. Nope. It's just sort of common sense, which is good. Raw manure applications, for instance, common sense, 90, 128, 120 out, as indicated in the NOP, but not really based on science. That could vary region to region or state to state. So as you know, FDA has released a new proposed water rule.
Yeah.
I am very nervous about the proposal. I'm not sure. I don't feel it's very clear. Mm-hmm. I think it's an attempt to stop complaining on the number of tests based on the initial model, that STV, which I personally thought was a good model. The number of tests was only a problem up front. but then it sort of followed a normal audit kind of system protocol, which was twice for groundwater, 3 times, but it was forcing you to pay attention to what that water body was doing over a life cycle, right? And
Right, right.
100%, I don't want to speak for any farmers on the call, but 100% of the farmers I know will do it, but they're not really aware of what's happening with that water source throughout a season. So I feel like they went from something that was prescriptive, I guess some folks would say too prescriptive, to no prescription at all.
At all. I know, like the farmer can decide. And then,
Right.
well, that's truly inspector, like what's
Well,
the
I mean,
inspector going to decide it?
Yeah. And
yeah,
then Lindsay, I
it
know you,
worries me too.
yeah, and I know
It
you do
worries me
farm
too.
education and farm
Yeah.
education consultation. My
Yeah.
bigger issue with that is there is absolutely no way you're going to get consistency with educators because
Yeah.
trust me, I talked to 4 last week and 4 had different ideas of what a risk assessment was.
Right.
And then coupled with that, regulators looking at those risk assessments,
Mhm.
when a farmer might be able to parrot what the extension told them, but not be able to actually talk about it with confidence on their own. So I
Right.
feel there's so many variables that I feel it's going to create way more anxiety than the first rule.
Yeah.
So that is not an official opinion.
Right.
It's a
Well, so what
personal
is the
opinion.
what does the CQP do?
So we are currently using just the normal GAPS audit site, water testing consistency. That's what we're doing. And I'll be
Okay.
honest with you, Eric and I and the team, every year, we have a good chuckle because getting farms to just pull 3 water samples
Mhm.
is like pulling
Yeah.
teeth every single year. They forgot, or they pulled
Right.
from the wrong body source, or they have a test. They don't remember where they pulled it from. So there's already challenges with that and for a decade. And you know that just as well as I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but at least the initial proposal was based on something they were already familiar with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was
I mean,
quantitative
well,
and qualitative.
yeah, I mean, harmonized GAP at least has been requiring a risk assessment of your water system. So that for folks who are doing harmonized GAP, oh yeah, I know how to do that. But for everybody else, it's like, huh?
Yeah, and even with the HGAP stuff, and once again, I'm talking about Massachusetts. Even with those guys, it was risk assessments that they downloaded, and it wasn't what I consider an actual risk or
Right.
what you would do, right? So
Right.
I
No,
just-
man, I walk them through it. Yeah.
yeah, I just feel it's so
Yeah.
vague. It's I'm hoping that the final rule is maybe a nice split down the middle of something a little bit more prescriptive.
So more guidance at least.
Yeah, more
Yeah.
guidance.
Oh,
please.
yeah. Okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
I had to ask.
No, I'm glad you did. So we will make, once again, our plan with CQP is to try to make it consistent whenever we have firm footing on
Right.
the water roll.
Right.
And they're saying by the end of the year, I don't know. I've read some of the public comments that are going in. I think they got more angry folks this time than they had last time, personally.
Well, then there are the folks who feel like it's a real triumph,
Right. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So moving on, Andel.
What?
Andel, you had your hand raised. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So just so I'm clear, my farm is in New Hampshire. Am I allowed to participate in this program?
You farm where? Am I pronouncing your name properly, first of all?
Yeah, it's fine.
No, it's not fine. Did I pronounce it properly?
My grandmother even says my name wrong. Don't worry about
Okay.
it. So yeah, I'm in Central New Hampshire. I'm a new entry alum. And can I participate in this program? I don't.
We've talked about it. We can do something for you if you don't have support. New Hampshire doesn't have their own gaps. I know CAPS will definitely get out there, right, Terry? Between Vermont and Massachusetts, yes, we'll support you in some way, shape, or fashion.
Okay, is CAPS equivalent?
Yes. Yes.
And it's easier for New Hampshire farms to
Yes.
get in?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, and we know that team like family. So yeah, you're in good hands with them if that's what you need.
Great, thank you so
Won't
much.
leave you isolated, and I'm gonna look up the pronunciation of your name after the call to make sure I get it right.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. JB?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael and Eric, for doing this, and thank you, New Entry, for hosting this. My question is related to vertical farms, CEA farms.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys have at least embarked on CQP with some. Wondering how much of what you just covered does or doesn't apply, or if there's anything else unique to CQP certification.
Yeah, I mean, the certification has really been set up in a way that it should cover all farms, independent of how you're operating. I mean, we have hydroponic farms that have reached out to us, aquaponic. You know, in some cases it's easier, in other cases not so much. With some of those integrated growing systems, you don't have a lot of stuff out there in the space that are specific to that activity. But we can support you. We'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hate to be so non-specific with the answer, but as a community, as a food safety community nationally, all the states and land grant universities and educators are grappling with some of these very specific growing cultures and trying to find resources and support to sort of give them more specific information. But for the most part, you know, we're going to look at your water, your soil, if you're using it, you know, all the basics. And if you're good with those things, you should be okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely, JB. Anyone else? Todd Sandstrom, is that the Todd Sandstrom I know?
It is, sir. It's good to see you.
Hi, Todd. How are you?
I'm good.
Haven't seen you for a while. We should catch up.
We totally need to. I have transitioned from revision. I'm now out at Medway
Okay.
on 17 acres.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Good for you, Todd.
Okay, so that's a
Good to hear that. Anyone else? Okay, so Leah and Sarah have my contact and Eric's. Oh, JB, do you have another question or you just left your hand up?
I'm sorry, I left my hand up.
Oh, that's okay. I can take another question. Anyway, Leah, make sure everyone has both Eric and my personal contact information. So if anybody wants to have a sidebar or a chat or has a question or want to complain about New Entry, they can call us and we'll
Yeah.
we'll listen. No, I really mean that. We're accessible to everybody. And there's no question that is there's no such thing as a dumb question, and independent of your scale, what you're growing, anything that we can do to help you, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, looking forward to the PSA and then the on-site. And nice to see everybody. Terry,